Kaboosh. All right, there we go. And
There you
then
go.
everybody goes, do, 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 do. I love that Liv is the first one in here. She's connecting to audio, but she'll hear it. Yeah. What up, girl?
Hi,
Steph,
wait.
Blue Lou, good on you for being here. Glad that your mom's good, or at least some in some state of good. Wade, you bastard. How dare you, sir? With that jacket, if it wasn't you, I'd come through this Zoom and slap you. Ryan, my bearded brother. Danny's here. Kristen's in the midst of therapy, which is awesome. Connor, good to see you. Kelly, listening's totally fine. Liam Churchill, I see Kevin Clausen was just talking about you. Danny Madrigal, not on set today. It's awesome. Jackie Boy, kick ass. We got more people. Vanessa's coming in here. Ashley Pulse is coming here. Johnny Fournier, kick ass, man. Well, obviously, this is going to be recorded and put up later. So, for any reason, some people stagger in late. We're starting to get to our normal highness, our normal
Hi.
kind of people. Ashley Paulson, good to see you. Mary, good to, I'm sure, hear from you in just a second. You elusive writer, you. This can, you guys can obviously go back and listen to this. I definitely think this is going to be one. If you got a pen, grab a pen. This is I've been kind of saving TJ for a while. TJ Fixman and I first worked together on Resistance 2, man.
Yeah,
That
long
was a
time ago.
minute ago. What's so funny is that was I walked into a session, and this is one of my first sessions in LA, and I was still in a place where I was like, I should dress to impress when I go to the studio. And I was wearing, I don't remember what it was. I just remember it was the noisiest piece of clothing that anybody should ever wear. And our engineer was like, hey, man, you're going to take that shirt off or you're going to wear my sweater. So
All right,
we
it was
got
something
through.
noisy.
It was so noisy.
Yeah.
But TJ was this just grumpy curmudgeon. You had just quit smoking, I think.
Oh, that's right.
You had just come off of that and you were like, New York. And it was one of the first times that I encountered, I think it was one of the first times that I had seen like the writer was in the room with us going through the sessions. And I saw someone that had this like, I'm really trying to tell a story. Yes, it's sci-fi. Yes, it's action. Yes, it's going to be this badass shooter, but this is something that really trying to move forward with some character. And then I've seen TJ go from writing on video games like Resistance, Ratchet and Clank, and his kind of tenure there at Insomniac to multiple others. And then all of a sudden, TJ's writing TV shows and movies, and people are buying them. So it's kind of like Hometown Boy makes good. And in light of all of that, it's not just the obviously Knight Rider has been recently announced. Which obviously in a COVID world, who knows where that is, and we may be able to talk a little bit about that. I'm not sure, but more than anything, what I really want us to focus on today is just kind of who TJ is, where TJ comes from, because everyone that we've talked to so far has had a different approach, a different style, and a different process, which is encouraging to me, and hopefully it's encouraging to you guys as well, that there's not just one way to do this, and here's the formula to become a good writer. Obviously, we have a wide buffet of different kind of writer here, and everybody in this room right now has a different voice, and therefore no one should write the same way. But hopefully what you'll be able to pick up on are some of the tenements that are consistent throughout people that have really found a way to be successful and are working, gigging writers in this industry of show. So, to kick that off, Brunswick? Why did I always think you were from New York? Did you spend more time in New York
Maybe.
than Jersey? Is that what it is?
No, never. My parents are from Brunswick, so I feel or from New York, so I feel like I've got like my accent is probably a combination of Bronx and New Jersey, which is probably the ugliest accent ever.
Ever.
But no, I was born in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Lived in like East Brunswick and then Marlboro, and then moved down to South Florida, Parkland, Coral Springs area for like 3 years, and up to Orlando, then out here. So,
How long have you been in LA?
God, a long time now. I feel like it's been I moved out here end of 2004. So what is that? 15, 16 years now. It's been
Yeah,
a
dude, it
while.
was, you had just moved.
Yeah,
How did you
Yeah.
fall into video game? Like, what was that? You always been a gamer, right? But like that wasn't like I'm gonna go write video games. What was that? How'd you get that gig?
It was funny because it's like I remember when I was like 12 years old, I loved Super Mario Brothers so much that I wrote a story for Super Mario Brothers and sent it to the address on the back of a Nintendo Power magazine. So like one of the first stories I remember writing was for video games, and they never even wrote back. But
I bet
so this
Bob
is
Hoskins wished they would have done that script instead of the one that they actually did for the
right.
movie.
I think like I also like included like level designs. So like I was very sort of like pie in the sky about it all. But then like years later, when I moved out to LA to be a writer, I wasn't really thinking about video games. But I had a degree in computer animation, so while I was trying to get my writing out, I got a job like QA testing at First EA and then Insomniac Games. And this is the weirdest thing ever. 'Cause it's serendipitous. Like the writer for Ratchet and Clank at the time, for whatever reason, just like wasn't really working out with those guys, and they let him go. And he said to them, he goes, "I'm sorry I didn't work out, but I've actually read that guy's scripts, and he's really good. You should give him a shot." And he said that on my last day at Insomniac because it was like I was on Resistance One at the time as a tester, and it's a temp position, right?
Sure.
They at the end of everything, they cut you loose. So I remember I wrote a goodbye email to the company saying, the subject heading was so long and thanks for all the fish. Sent it out, and as I'm packing up all my stuff to leave, I get an email from HR saying, "Hey, Brian Hastings wants you to come in and talk about video game writing." So I spent that weekend unemployed. I had $200 left in my bank account. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to move back to New Jersey on $200. And then I interviewed on like Monday, got the job on Wednesday, and started as a writer like the following week. So it was super weird how I came into it. To your point about there not being a path, right?
God, I love Brian Hastings. That
Yeah,
is
he was cool dude.
what a just that right there is a story that people have written. You know what I mean? Nobody actually
Yeah, you
has
hear it
that
all the time.
story. People write that story.
Yeah, The Rock talks about it all the time. Like I had like $7 or whatever in his wallet when he finally got his break. I literally had like $200 left in my account. I had no idea how I was going to even afford to move home, and then I got the job. So it was like thank God because I don't know what I would be doing if I wasn't writing. I suck at math. I don't know how to tie a tie right. This is it. This is all I got. So
Would you say that you were? I mean, a lot of times, and I don't know if this is the same way with you guys, but for me, a lot, I've had to be very diligent about my focus not shifting to the things that are, at least at the moment, paying the bills, or when my desires and my passions are this. Like from a very early on, it sounds like writing was like this is what I want to do, but then I also got this, and then I also started doing this. Were you still writing when you were doing the quote side gig that just to pay the bills or okay.
yeah, my sort of what I imagined was that I would end up at a regular job, regular being like something at a video game studio, but still not as a writer. I thought I'd be a modeler or an animator, even though I wasn't nearly good enough to do either one of those jobs. But I thought that like writing would be like a moonlighting thing because I had never at that time met a successful working writer. So the idea was just sort of for those foreign things. You see people doing it on TV. You don't really see them like in real life.
Sure.
So I did not imagine. I was always writing, but I never thought it would be like never believed it would be a full time job, even though that's all I wanted to do as a full time job.
What was your education like? Did you go to school for this or was this like just you were grinding it out in your room? Like what did that look like for you?
So I was afraid to go to film school because I never met somebody who went to film school. That doesn't mean you can't be. That just means I didn't meet them. So I was very terrified of it. So I was a communications major, which is worthless, no matter what
Right.
college you go to. It was organizational communications, and I can't tell any of you what that is yet. But I had always liked to write, and I had a teacher, one of my gen ed sort of English teachers, brought me a writer's market, which is like this giant thick book of where to sell your stuff, and that's how I started like self teaching. And then I just would start like dropping into like screenwriting classes, and like the teachers wouldn't notice me, and I would just sit there and sort of like absorb with everybody else. And the screenwriting teacher caught me eventually and then just let me stay. So I took the courses, but I wasn't a film major or a writing major. It was mostly just by doing, by seeing what's out on the internet, by reading a lot, that kind of thing.
Did it literally start that way where you're like, I don't like this movie? Which do you think compelled you more? Is like, I don't like this story. I bet I could do better. Or was it that story was so good, it makes me want to write a story like it? Which do you feel like you were drawn to more?
The latter, 100%. I did not think that I was like, oh my God, I could do so much better than this garbage that was out there. I was watching like Goonies and Back to the Future and being like, wow, I just like, this is the power of cinema. I want to be involved somehow in this. And I was always the guy who, and I'm sure every single person on this call is the same person, who like you sort of space out when and go off in your own little world when you're sitting in class and you start to like write your own little stories, you draw your own little characters. Like you're always just sort of drawn to telling stories. So eventually, it just became kind of undeniable that this is what I wanted to do. So yeah,
There's a book over your right shoulder
oh yeah.
that I would be remiss if we didn't at least point out because it's not amongst other books. It has a stand, pardon the pun.
Ah,
What the fuck? What is the deal with the book?
yeah. It is probably my favorite, one of my favorite books, if not my favorite book. And I got the that's not even a first edition. We were talking about this before. That's the unproofed copy that Stephen King owned that he actually put his handwritten notes in before the first edition.
I don't
So it's
understand that, man.
yeah, it's the most inspiring thing I have here.
I Well, how old were you when you read that book?
Oh God, I think the first time I must have been around 14, 15. Yeah,
Man,
it was
dude, that's a
right after The Stand.
wait. So that wasn't your introduction to Stephen King. That was the digestif. That was the
Yeah, yeah.
fuck.
The Stand was my very first. I was like 11 or 12 years old and I sucked at sports. So when I went to camp, I just like took my unabridged copy of The Stand, just sat under a tree and read it like the entire summer. Like that was the guy I was.
That's like
So
600
yeah,
pages, right?
this one was like even more. I think this was when they added in like an extra two. So it was like 800 or 900 pages. Yeah. And
Have
before that, it was like all Hardy Boys books for me.
wait. So that was gonna be my next question. So had you always like been like a voracious reader, or Stan was 800 and the unabridged is over 1,000? Jesus Christ, Kevin. I love
Yeah,
that
it's
you
really
know that, but now I'm just that now I have heartburn. I try to I read books. Like this is what everyone's been hearing me talk about this. This is the book that I've been reading for the last too long. All right. And I am literally halfway through. Now it's a little bit different. Alan Watts is not just like narrative. It's a lot of history and it's a lot of fact and it's a lot of very dense writing. I could probably put down a decent sized book if it was fiction and story and compelling that way. But I'm just not. Laura Bailey is the same way. She can just go and like devour any tome that you put in front of her. And she's like, that was fun. I'm like, that was an afternoon. That would have taken me a year of my life to be able to read. But you say
yeah.
you went from like Hardy Boys, which is going to be like 200 pages, 150 pages, and kind of, drugstore level to that. What was the leap? Was it the story?
You
What
know,
caused that?
it was like I remember it was silly. It was I watched the first episode of the 1991 Stand. Remember
Yeah,
that miniseries with Gary Sinise? And I liked it so much that I decided to stop watching it. And then my dad just drove me to the bookstore, and he like encouraged me to get the book and take it to camp with me. And that was
your
sort of the
dad's
thing.
awesome.
I was always a bit like a big reader, but like I think that was my first like adult book. I was
Hmm.
always just reading stuff that was for kids. And when I read that one, I just remember being like, "Holy crap!" Like how complex and textured and compelling uh, stories can be when they're written for adult. I mean, they can be for kids too, but just like I had never read anything at the volume of this before, so it changed me.
How old was Stephen King when he wrote it? Because I know, like Dark Tower, he started writing that when he was in high school, right? How was he like? Anybody know? Just feel free to
I
sound
think Dark
off.
Tower he was like 21
I thought he
for
was
the
younger
first
than
one.
that.
He might
Still,
he might have been.
too
Um,
young. You not coming up through, like, we've had Holly Gross on here, we've had Mary Kinney, who both of them went to NYU, and so these are people who have people from UCLA, or USC, that, this is where you go, that they breed writers. You, 25 to 30, thanks, Kevin. You didn't have that. So walking into this is what my passion is going to be, and I want to, speaking for you, your internal monologue, you didn't know you had this. I want to be a writer. I just know that these kind of stories move me. This inspires me. So if I could do something like that, then I'm gonna do that. The first time you look at a blank white page or a blinking cursor, what is that? What are you feeling? What are the emotions that you attach to that? Is it anxiety? Is it thrill? Is it fear? Like, what are you feeling at that moment?
I've talked to a lot of writers who say it's fear because it is like the start of this really long, drawn out process. But I think it's just, for me, it's excitement. I get to like set up everything the way that I want it. I create my my research docs and my outlines. I just have everything just so there's like a nice like sort of ceremony to it. It's
Hmm.
so for me it's exciting. Like I know now, just like every writer does after they've completed probably 5 or 6 scripts or stories, that they will get to the end. And once you know that you will get to the end because you've been there before, it gets a little bit less terrifying. Like I know that my first draft is going to suck, so I stop calling it my first draft. I call it my draft zero. Like I know
Hmm.
that I'm going to doubt myself at some point, so I let myself off the hook when I can. Once you've been through it enough, it's all just about sort of like the love of writing, and you sort of mute all the negative stuff that hits a lot of new writers.
How has that process grown though? Because I mean, surely you didn't start off as like, okay, here's some great wisdom to tell myself as I'm writing my first script ever. Like, how is that process iterate? Speaking as someone who worked in game design, you understand the value of iteration.
Yeah.
Where did you start from, and how did you start learning, like, okay, this isn't working, or this does work, I need to continue doing this, but I need to stop doing this? Especially
It
the
was
notion of like letting yourself off the hook. That doesn't come right off the bat, does it?
No, no, God, no, not at all. I think the first couple scripts, I doubted myself a lot because you don't know how to get certain things that are in your mind onto the page. Like little
Mhm.
things like what happens if, I have an argument and characters are arguing over each other. How do I do that? And then you have to look it up and be like, oh, there's dual dialogue and ways of writing it. How do you cut back and forth between people on a phone call when you don't know about intercuts? You get sort of flustered by it. And this was at a time where there wasn't, like, there were books that you can get on it, and I got them, but like there weren't a million scripts just readily available online. So I had to like go through the process a couple times and understand that there was a reason why I would look at like the Born Identity script, which when I first moved out here, I remember like studying it, and I would get frustrated with myself because no matter how hard I tried, my stuff would not look l- like the style on the Born Identity script. But then I realized, and now it seems so obvious, now that I've been doing this for a little while, I realized that it's good that it doesn't look like that because I'd be forcing myself to write like somebody else, where you shouldn't suppress your voice. Your voice is what you're bringing to the table that people are going to hire you for. So embracing that and learning to not compare yourself to other more successful writers was sort of the game changer for me, when I just realized that that's a comparison I should not even bother with and just focus on telling the story that's in my head as best I can.
David Milch is very similar in the sense that he his first script, first show he ever wrote won Emmys, and he won an Emmy for it. Um, but he all he knew was using that kind of example over the illustration of looking at a script and trying to go, mine doesn't look like this. All he knew, I think I've shared this with you guys before too, all he knew is that the first paragraph started with int, and the second would start with X'd, and then the next one would be X'd. And so that's just what he did. And one of the producers was like, hey, just great script. Just you have your interiors as your exteriors, sometimes your exteriors are interiors. And he was like, what, you can't take a joke? Of course I know what I'm talking about.
Nice.
So it's the notion of I love frustration.
Yeah.
Like right now, Traveler's 2 years old. This is the age of frustration. This is the age where his frustration is because of a lack of understanding of, or there's not a process in place to help him accomplish the goal that he wants. So he gets frustrated by it. So he learns the process, he learns the skill, and then that level of frustration goes away. And there's a whole other level of frustration that's going to follow. But frustration is not bad. It sounds like
No.
for you, it spurns you forward going, okay. Or the best realization is like, man, I don't have to look like this. I could have my own voice. I didn't go to USC. I don't have the NYU degree from this. But what I do understand is how a story can move somebody.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of people in this town, and out of this town who try to suggest that there's only one way of doing things and that's their way.
Hmm.
And I've had directors say this to me, I've had producers say this to me, I've had writers say this to me, but like when it comes to formatting, even when it comes to how you tell your story or what your story should be about, should your inciting incident be on page 10 or page 12 or whatever, like at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Like there's basic structural things like a three-act structure, and you obviously don't want to wait until 60 minutes into the movie to do an inciting incident, even though it completely worked on Aliens. But like outside of those really like small things, I've never had like one of the rules I remember hearing was like don't ever change the font in your final draft script. And I think I wrote a scene where like something was popping up on television and I just wanted to stand out in the read a little bit more, so I changed the font. And then I waited to get yelled at by a producer or an exec, and nobody said anything. Like they don't
Right.
care. It's just, is the story good? Have you bothered to learn the craft? Are you full of yourself? Meaning, are you just trying to use big words just to show people you have a vocabulary?
Hmm.
Like those are the things I think people are turned off by. But they're not gonna be like, oh my god, you put a design on your title page. I'm not gonna read this.
you, I, Jay, in real quick, you, that totally sidebarred me. That was such a good thing to say.
So,
Talking about the script that you turn in, right? And you're letting somebody finally look at this. And it's not just like, hey, do me a favor, read my script. You're not at Cantor's and trying to be like every other writer and just say, hey, will you do me a favor and tell me that I'm a good writer and I deserve to be in this town. But you actually are turning in a script with the intention of hopefully gaining employment in some form of fashion. How?
sometimes.
Okay, then what does that mean? Tell me that qualifier.
Well, sometimes I will sell a pitch, and then I'm being paid to submit the script, paid to submit the script after I've already sold them on the idea. But if I write it on spec, then yeah, I'll submit the script, and hopefully that will sell.
Would you say then the first thing that comes is, do you have a script that you are pitching, or do you have an idea that you're pitching and they go yes, and then you devote the time to the script, or does it vary?
It varies. Like
Okay.
when I wrote Past Midnight, there would be no way that I could sell that as a pitch because it's basically like the Dark Knight meets 48 Hours. It's about a guy who was his city's Batman. This guy named Midnight, and then he gets arrested because they find out who he is, and he spends 25 years in jail before they sign him out of prison and make him like a consultant for the police. So it feels like it should be based on an IP. And if I just tried to sell the pitch, studios would have been like, well, like, maybe we make it a Batman movie or maybe we make it a Valiant movie. To prove that it works on its own, I wrote it on spec. But if I have an idea, like I'm working like Bo Flynn on something right now where like the idea was very clean and very castable and a little bit less scary for execs, it didn't feel like it touched IP. It's not super expensive. That we say, okay, let's just try to pitch it so that the benefit is, well, obviously you get to sell it before you even write it, but the other benefit is that you're writing the script to the specific notes of the studio. So you're not like in a vacuum trying to guess what they're gonna like. You're like, oh, they want, they're looking for something for Michael B. Jordan, so it's got to be a character who's like in his 30s and this
Hmm.
way and that way, that kind of thing.
Have you lost when you start kind of getting into the minutia of that, where it's like Tom Holland is doing every movie right now. Tom Holland is very close to Nick Caging himself. He's going to just be the guy where
Yeah, very
Tom
close.
Holland, we're going to look back and go, God damn, that guy did a lot of movies. But Tom Holland right now, it seems to be like what everyone's writing to or for.
Hmm.
So is there a part of you, how do you, there's such an artist that's within you. You're a very pragmatic person. I've known you long enough to know you're not like blown by every whim and this huge emotional person, but you're very pragmatic, but you're still an artist. How do you trade and governor that level of artistry with commerce so that you're not with someone who feels like you've got a voice and you're like, no, I want to make my fucking dent in this world. I don't want to write a script for this person. Maybe you don't like who the actor is or the actress is. How do you go, all right, it's not about that. It's about this and being able to tune into your artistry that is being bought and paid for with the commerce of the industry?
I mean, that's an interesting question. It's a tough one
Yes.
to answer because there's no real set answer to it. It's
Have you
like
ever
I know
been
when I
met with
go to,
that? Maybe that's one way to ask it is like, has that ever happened to you where you're like, we're Troy or TJ, you're gonna write a script for give me a shitty actor. you know, someone you're like, I don't think that person is talented. It's like we've got a 3 picture deal with this person, and we want you to be the one that writes them. You're like, okay, I don't know how I can put the character that I have in mind. Because we've talked about this before, where it's like this idea actually gets wrapped up in this IP for the very reason that you're talking about. It's like I can't sell it as an original idea, but we can make it a Batman movie, and that's what Die Hard with a Vengeance was. It was something else, and they were like, we're going to make it a Die Hard movie.
yeah, it
So
was
that happens
Simon
a lot.
Says, and then it became a Lethal Weapon movie, and then it became a Die Hard movie. It just basically like they just knocked it around a bunch. Yeah,
Hmm.
I mean, honestly, if somebody came to me and they've been like, hey, like we have this idea for this actor, and he really wants to do X, Y, Z. Um, uh, can you write this? And if I feel like I can't, I say no because it's not gonna do me or them any good to commit to something that I'm gonna not be able to deliver on, and then it just wastes a whole lot of time and money, and then I become unhireable to that studio, and then they waste a whole lot of money. Like, so
Hmm.
if it's that bad, then I'll say something. I have before like talked to like if I have an idea that I'm thinking about pitching to a studio. For the first step is to go. They send you to producers, and we often call this the bottled water tour because you just basically go from office to office, getting a new bottle of water, talking about the idea, pitching it to them, and hearing sort of what they would do with it. And if I thought I was really creatively aligned with the producer, but the producer had a specific actor in mind that I didn't quite see, I wouldn't say no because attachments in this town are very fair weather. Like people will hop on and hop off, and there's when I first moved out here, everybody was like looking for movies for Seth Rogen and Shia LaBeouf, and now not so much for one of them, right? So
Right.
I in that case I wouldn't get too held up on it. But if they already have this actor like locked in, and I'd be pitching that actor and I'd be working with that actor, and I just don't have the same sensibilities as them, then I would probably just be like, I'm not your guy, which is
Were you
tough.
always that way, or do you think you had to come to that? Um, what gave you? Because it takes confidence to say no, right? It takes faith to say no.
I was always
Um,
that way. Yeah.
you were always
Because
that
I
way.
remember I was put up for a project when I had never sold anything before called The Fast and Furious, which was supposed to be about guinea pigs who raced cars. And I I hadn't sold any, but I'd seen enough failed screenwriters out here, not because they weren't talented, but because they just chose the money that
Mm,
was offered them to them rather than the projects that were going to get them to the next level, the projects that either were going to kill, that were going to get made, etc. So I started off defaulting to, is this smart for me? Because at the same time, I was also still working at Insomniac and EA, so I really only had like a couple hours a day to write stuff on the side, right? So I tried to choose carefully so that whatever I made was going to be good enough to get me to that next level.
mm.
Uh, there's plenty of people who have like gone the other route and just found themselves. I call it lily padding. They just go from like job to job, like scrambling for whatever they can get, and because it's their heart's not in it, they're turning in crap, and it just kills their career.
How do you translate comic books? Like you mentioned Dark Knight and Past Midnight, kind of having that vibe of Dark Knight meets 48 Hours. We can get into that. I've been going down like this Eddie Murphy, like 80s Eddie Murphy rabbit holes. Like the fact that
That's
my
so
wife
good.
has never seen Beverly Hills Cop just breaks my heart a little bit. But you, how do you apply the skills that you learned? Is it the same thing? You're like, I read Death of Batman, or I read whatever that inspired you. Like I could do that in a comic book. Because you've written how you've done 3-ish, 4 issues? How many have you done?
Of comic books.
Yeah.
I did four Ratchet and Clank comic books, and then one like one-off Batman comic. That was like it was like me, Damon Lindelof, like Steve Niles, all these like guys who were way more like established than me, all doing like 10-page non-canonical Batman stories. So I can't call myself like a comic book like expert, but like I've certainly gone out for a lot of like comic book adaptations and just adaptations in general. Like Knight Rider is an adaptation of a series, and like it always an adaptation has the same logic to it no matter what the medium. I feel like you have to remember that you have to satisfy the diehards and you have to make them feel heard, but you're not writing it exclusively for the diehards. Like there's a bigger audience for every single for comic book and series that you have to consider. So like for Knight Rider, I wrote it in a way that people would know that I did my research and I'm a fan of the series, but I didn't want to make it something that there was like a barrier to entry for. So like you had to learn who Michael Knight was and everything he did during the show, or
Hmm.
something with the comic books. Like you don't want to use the canon from the comic books and expect the audience to all be comic book people. There's plenty of people who saw Batman who have never read a Batman comic in their life.
For
So
sure.
I just try to isolate the like what I call like the DNA of an IP, and like say what are the things in this series or comic or TV show that if I don't include it, it'll feel like we're just using the title, because that's the fastest way to get people to like just internet flame your project, right?
Sure. How do you I'm curious, kind of going back to, I love how I want to circle back to this because we got on this great tangent about it's not always just turning in the script to get the job. Sometimes it's building that relationship, and it's the idea is more the pitch is more the product than it is the actual script. But let's say that you've written Fade to Black, you've written The End, you've written whatever, you've got that script, and you're like, this is fucking awesome. Like this is it. You feel great, and then you turn that script in, and that is not the response from the other side of the table. A, has that happened to you? And B, what stopgap do you have in place? What process for that have you learned where you go, okay, great. Well, I want some good actionable notes. Like, how do you deal with that quote rejection?
Bourbon with mainly. No, I haven't. I've been lucky. I haven't gotten the oh my god, what is this response. I have gotten like the we like this a lot. There's like some tonal stuff that doesn't feel in line with our mood, so we feel like we've got some heavy lifting to do. Uh, but that's only happened once or twice, and when it does happen, you just you go okay. Let's talk this through, and then you roll up your sleeves and you do the work necessary to get it where it needs to be. It's I feel like when you establish your contract, you get a certain amount of steps and a certain amount of like it's all sort of itemized as far as like how much writing you're supposed to do. But if what I submitted isn't what they're expecting, I'd rather make sure we're all excited and like when they submit it to the studio, it's like we're really fired up about this. So I'll take the extra time to figure it out. But I haven't gotten the what were you think? I mean, I'm knocking on my desk when I say it. The what the hell were you thinking response. It is difficult, I'll say, like internalizing a note that you wholeheartedly disagree with. Like I've gotten notes a lot of times from like a producer where like I can tell that note comes from them skimming the script, right? From them not giving it an actual read, and I can't say, "Hey, buddy, like you didn't read." So I'll just have to like take it, and then they'll be like, "Just hit this harder." I'm like, and I'll say like, "Sure," but in my mind, I'm going, "Do I just underline it? Like, what do you really
Hmm.
want me to like?" So there's certain times where we have to figure out how to address things that may not necessarily be your fault, but you can't, be defensive about it. You can't, say, hey, like you guys don't understand my genius, my story. You just have to be like, all right, like, walk me through what your issue is, and let's figure out how to overcome it.
I think that's similar problems for actors or even directors or whatever, where someone goes, "Oh, you just be angry." Like, okay, what does that look like? right? I don't understand that note. There's a great story. Bradley Cooper, he had just finished doing Star is Born, and he was doing some other movie, and some director, newer director, had come over to him, or had started to in between a scene, and started to like, I want to tell you, and he goes, "You don't have the note." He goes, "Excuse me." He goes, like, "You don't have the note. When you have the note, come back to me. I'll listen." And
Uh-huh.
he's like, he was right. He didn't have the note. He just wanted to direct him, but he's like, "You don't have the note. I will listen to you if you have the note. But if you go back, it's like, hit it hard." It's like, what does that mean? That's a tough position. Even Bradley Cooper being a director is like, "Listen, I'm not gonna disrespect you because I've been in that chair too. But right now I'm in this chair, and I'm gonna pull you off to the side real quick and go, don't give a note unless you have a note, and you don't have the note yet." It's like, that's awesome.
That is amazing. That's like worth all its weight in gold, actually. Because like I feel like a lot of people, like I remember, I can't name the project unfortunately, but like I was on a project that was an IP, and there was like the IP holders, the producers, of which there were like four. There were three execs in the room, and there was like their friends, and all of them wanted to justify their roles in the room by just giving notes. And that makes things so muddy because even though there's like one hapless like junior trying to like scribble it all down and filter it, there are a lot of notes that will conflict. There are a lot of notes that just feel like they're just given just to be given. Like you're saying, they're not actionable. And then as an
Right.
actor or a writer, you're like, what do I do? So it's a pleasure when you start working with somebody who doesn't do that. Like I remember I was writing a Disney script, and I was writing it for it was Gargoyles, but not the cartoon Gargoyles. It was like a similar concept for Disney. And Lauren Donner was my producer, and people had told me how tough she was, and like she's gonna make you earn it. She's gonna make you work for it. And I was like, okay, cool. And she was like very blunt about like what she wanted, but she was direct in a way that I appreciated because I remember once she started to give me a note and then stopped herself halfway through. It goes, you know what? That's not actionable. Forget what I said. Let's move on. I was like,
Damn.
right? Like as an actor, I mean, doesn't that isn't that how much better a performance do you give when it's an actual thoughtful note that considers what you're trying to do
Yes.
and builds on that rather than just like uses some like general like I'm not feeling the emotional weight of what you're doing and you're
I'm
like
sorry. I don't know who
yeah
hurt you as a child. I feel like someone who's gonna give me that note and go, "You know what? Never mind." The next time they come to me with a note, I'm gonna lean in and go, "I really wanna know what you have to say." And I
right
also know that if we both agree that it's not a good note, we have the safety now to disagree with each other, or the safety to move away. That right there is that's invaluable. I want to hit two things before we kind of open it up to everybody else. One is kind of it's a little bit of a stock question, but it's it's not about the variety of the question as much as it is the variety of the answer. What is your day typically like? Is there a formula process? You talked about the itemized things that you get when you've got a project and you've got these milestones you've got to hit, and that sounds like doing the paperwork for the writing, which a lot of people look past, and that's an obstacle to overcome. But what does your tip? Is there a typical day, and if so, what does it look like?
yeah like I mean I'm in a lucky position that even in COVID I have something like four projects right now that are going on, so that means there are four deadlines that I have to make. They're not deadline like a lot of writers just get to be like, okay, I'm just gonna work on this in my own time, and when it's ready, it's ready. We've got four deadlines. It's ready when the contract says it has to be ready.
Right.
So usually, like I wake up pretty early these days. I wake up usually between 5 and 6. So I'll spend like the first hour just like having my coffee and just like catching up on emails and that kind of thing. But then I will give myself like I've got a notebook that's off to the side that's not for notes. It's for like tasks, and I just sort of populate it with like how many pages I need to hit on each project per day because I'm a completionist. I like to be able to like tick the box and then move to the next thing. So I'll just sort of math out like how many pages I have to do, what sequence I want to get through. If it's not always script writing. Sometimes it's like I have to write this Act Three set piece where Kit goes up against the major antagonist, and how is that going to play out? And those are a beast to write. So I'll just like sort of setting myself some sort of micro goals and going after those is always helpful to me because when you're a pantser, when you just sort of like fly by the seat of your pants and don't plan anything, some people can do it. I cannot. I mean, I can, but then I'll always think of something down the line that's better than where I thought I was going, but then makes me have to like retcon everything behind it, and that becomes such a headache. I'd rather get that revelation by by developing and developing, and then write out the script, because then I can just crack out the script in like a month or so.
So you're not necessarily focused on writing the pages, the script, as much as you are breaking the script, as coming up with all of the things that would go to. Mary Kinney talked about this last week, where she was just like, I'll spend all my time on my whiteboard and my notes and everything, and she was like, and then by the time I go to actually write the script, like you said, you just bang it out. So is that you talk about your zero draft? Is even if you're writing in final draft, do you consider that writing the script, or do you consider that developing the idea?
If well, I mean, if like Final Draft now has things on it like Beatboard, and it's got like other things other than just like the script view. So I suppose it's still like technically development, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what you call it. People have crazy processes. I've seen people like I'm the kind of weirdo who has to start off a story analog, and I have to do it with the same kind of notebook and the same kind of pen
Hmm.
every time.
That's
It's
cool.
bizarre, but that's how I get started, and then I move to an outline doc in Word, and then from Word, then I move to Final Draft. I don't. There are some people who
Interesting.
insist on doing index cards. There are some people who use like apps to break it. I have a very specific process that just works for me, and then I stick to it.
We've got just a little bit of time before we open up, and there's one more thing that I want to talk to you about. We both share a great affinity for Rod Serling. I have found, yeah, dude, I have plumbed the depths and feel like I've still just scratched the surface of what that man will forget more about writing than I will ever possibly learn in my lifetime.
Yeah,
And he
same.
understood it as such I wonder what kind of writer Rod Serling would be now. Like, what would he contribute to the zeitgeist now? Because that mind is timeless. It was just simply captured in this burgeoning media of television. And he considered this is what blew my mind. He considered Twilight Zone to be at the end of his career. But name one I can because I've done the research. But name one thing that you knew of Rod Serling doing before Twilight Zone.
Right. No,
Nothing.
Twilight,
Even though he
Twilight
won
Zone's
a Pulitzer,
definitely.
I mean, he's done all of this stuff. For you, I know what I've gleaned from Rod Serling, and I spit out his maxims ad nauseum. But for you, what is it about Rod Serling that you pull the most from, and what is it about him that makes him someone to revere or venerate?
I think for me, he's sort of like my Hitchcock. It's like
Hmm.
he was the guy for me who showed me how to sort of squint my eyes and turn my head and find an ending or a solution that wasn't what people expected. And if you can do that as a writer, regardless of the medium or the genre, but if you can surprise the reader, that's like 80% of it. I feel like good on people who have that amazing vocabulary. But if your story is expected and trite, like no one's gonna care. But like Rod, like we were pals, me and
I
Rod,
wish.
right? Rod Serling, like he thought about the journey that the audience was going on. He was so intense when he would talk. When he would have like the cigarette that
Yes,
I put the paper in the typewriter and I bleed kind of thing is what he said.
my
Um,
favorite.
right? But he was the one who sort of showed me like think about your ending when you're writing your beginning. Think about like how to weave left instead of right. And I think when you look at like any like J.J. Abrams stuff, J.J. is using all basically like the toolkit that Rod Serling put together for us.
I still, by the way, if you guys don't know what we're talking about, you just go on YouTube and just do Rod Serling talks. And there's on writing, there's brilliant one-on-one conversations that he had. Basically, he just invited some USC students into his living room, um, which is it's just incredible. One of my favorite ways I want to begin an album this way is like, where do ideas come from? I don't know, Doris. Where do ideas come from? It's one of my favorite like quotes
So
ever.
intense.
It's so good.
Yeah. Like, I
Um,
wanted Rod Rod Sterling bust in my office. I can't find one anywhere. The internet has not provided me with one, but I would just worship it every day, right?
Yeah,
With the
like candles and like give little mints and stuff to like it was a
Yep.
Buddha.
Oh, good.
I think that if you guys should definitely just take a second and just go down the YouTube rabbit hole. There's talk series at UCLA that's incredible. Um, uh, it's a wealth of knowledge there to be had. The final question I'll ask you: we started out talking about that book behind you, The Stand, and the thing that makes it so special to you, because anybody can have a copy of that book, but that book specifically, what makes it so special to you is not only your attachment to it from such an early age of 14 and reading that and that sparking this, I want to do this, but also the fact that there's a personal connection even within the pages of Stephen King's handwritten notes and being able to see maybe even some of his flaws. Is there anything that you have now that you would want sitting on someone's desk on a stand that would show your notes? Have you written that yet? Or do you think that that work still lies ahead of you?
I don't know. Like I'm one of the writers who tends not to like anything that he's written after like the 2 year mark, right? Like because your writing is always getting better. So if I look at anything that I've written older than 2 years, I don't think there's anything there that's worthwhile. Now, the tragedy of being a writer is that you're never going to be able to enjoy your stories the way somebody else will. You're only ever going to see the flaws when
Hmm.
you turn left instead of when you wanted to turn right. All these other things. So maybe there's something that I've written that would mean a lot to somebody, but if it is, like, I do keep, when I said I have all the, I use this specific kind of notebook, I still have all the notebooks. And if you looked,
Jesus.
yeah, so it's like if you were a Ratchet and Clank fan, I do have like my Ratchet and Clank A Crack in Time notebook where I broke the entire story for it. And you'll see all the different directions I, tried to take it, ended up not taking it. So that could be, interesting to somebody. I'm just not the guy to know what it is, because to me, if it's older than 2 years, I don't even want to look at it.
That's some great diligence as well, man. Is to constantly be looking ahead and leave it to the people to be looking behind. Um, I think Grace is kind of pulling some questions right now. If there's anybody that has their questions up, I can kind of scan very quickly. You can just use the Zoom chat either put the question in the Zoom chat, or if you like to ask directly, then we can raise your hand and we can ask TJ here. I'm scanning across. I don't see anybody yet. Who's got their hand up? Nobody? You fearful
Kristen's just
people.
sent in one in the chat.
Perfect. What is that question I'm looking at? Kristen, you're awesome. I can always count on Kristen to ask one of the first questions. TJ, did you find writing for the movie of Ratchet and Clank, for example, more stifling versus the games because of time constraints in the medium itself?
Oh, that's a tough one because it's like, um, I think there's more time, there's more constraints in video game writing by far
Huh.
because you're putting together a story at, like, you're basically laying down the tracks as the train is coming through, right? Like all the artists and animators and modelers, like they're all getting started at the same time. So I will always think that that game writing is a little bit more stifling. But with with that particular example, it's tough because I ended up departing that project after about a year. We just weren't, me and the director and the producers weren't seeing eye to eye. There was no like animosity or anything, but we just, they had no intention of really putting the script that I wrote into production because it just wasn't what they wanted to do.
Hmm.
So that project was tougher for me for other reasons. So I ended up leaving and just having, sort of letting it go to, Kevin Monroe, I think Jerry Swallow to write.
Mary to
Thank
Spelder.
you for that.
Yeah, thank you. It's an incredible question. When you're working on a pitch, how do you keep your story from sounding contrived or derivative of other works? What a great question.
Yeah, I mean, that is a great question. It's tough because, like, when you get out here, you realize that everybody has an idea. There's a joke that writers tell each other. I don't know if it's like a joke, but it's like sort of a parable that there's only 7 stories in the universe, and we're just all telling and they're not. That's not wrong, right? So
Right?
the only thing we can really do is stress test it by doing it for, like, I've got agents and managers who will hear it first, and then I've got producers who will respond to it. And if I hear during that sort of like initial pitch period before it goes to the studios that like, hey, something like this already sold, or that's a little too much like The Matrix or whatever, like then I just know it's not about it's not a matter of pitching it differently. There's something inherently wrong with the story conceptually. And like I was pitching with a director friend of mine. I was pitching a sort of buddy cop movie, and we got to I think it was like the Bruckheimer company, and we finished the entire pitch, and they looked and they were stunned, and we're like, we just nailed it. They're stunned, they're speechless, and they go, you just, and this was like 2 years ago, 3 years ago. They go, you just pitched us our movie, Bad Boys 3. And we're like,
Uh-oh.
what part was closer? They're like, everything. They're like, you that beat for beat our movie. So we're like, so we're not gonna pitch this
We're just
anymore.
gonna. Can I have a bottle of water before I leave?
Like, I have a bottle of water, thank you. And that, obviously we didn't mean to be, it's just there's parallel thought and it happens. And when you hear that, you just have to like, you have to go, okay, it's time to move on, which is why like the key for any writer is to not rest your laurels on one idea. You have to like constantly be generating. I'm like my dry erase board, my mirrored closet doors, they're all filled with half-baked ideas and characters and all this other stuff. Because if you go into a pitch and you get shot down within the first 10 minutes because something like that, you have to have something ready to go behind it. You can't be like one of these like precious, like there's people who just like to romanticize what writing is, and they just like to feel like, oh, like I'll just sit and I'll just create this idea over the course of 6 years, and I'll just sort of write it on a cobblestone street in Paris. It just no, you gotta crack it out, make it happen.
It is that recurring one like physical object is the whiteboard. I don't want to falsely attribute it to him, but I believe it was Paul McCartney who said there are 8 notes in their respective sharps and flats, and they were all doomed to be repeated. The difference is how you play them. And that is true. It's always a boy with the dog or a boy meets girl. It's just like, what's the difference between the girl and the boy, and what's the type of dog? Steph, I'm not sure if you're still in here or not, but you always ask great questions. Here's one. Has there ever been a project that you've been given that you weren't really excited about or had reservations about? If so, did you end up happy with the finished product? We kind of touched on that briefly, but I'm curious to answer that directly.
So there was one time that I did it. There was one time because I listened to my reps were really hot on the project idea, and they sort of talked me into, hey, this is like a stepping stone to bigger things with this studio. And it was a fine idea, but it wasn't one that I was excited about, or one where I was like, oh, I've got a point of view on this one that will be standout. It was literally like, I could do this. That was as far as it went. And what I submitted, I think, was fine, and I think it was exactly what they had asked for, but it never went anywhere. And listen, I've sold 14 scripts that are all either like at various stages of development or they've died on the table. There's a lot of things that can happen, but I actually think for this one, the reason why it never went anywhere was because it just wasn't the right project for me, and that was my one like, okay, so I have to balance out my desire when I can to make money with my desire to tell the right stories that will move my career forward. Because the thing that we haven't talked about yet, and this is a great time to say it, is that there is power in no. Right? I'm
Mm.
sure you found that as an actor, right? Like you say, like when you say no, like we feel at the beginning like we're basically like killing our careers. Like, oh my God, these people want to give us money, and we're saying no, don't do that. But if you say no, they're gonna want you more because you're not just so thirsty for a project you'll take anything.
Right.
Um,
You
I
be
think there's power in
judicious
that.
with that no. Like you don't just throw that no out as a ploy because they'll smell and like, fine,
Right.
contrarian. But if people will always respect passion, and it may not. There's been times when I go no, and like okay, and this isn't the project, but those people have come back to me and going, hey, we really respected you, you holding strong to your position. And you're right. You're like, I want to let you know I'm not the right person for this. Like, and hearing you say the same thing is like, look, here's what's going to happen. We're going to end up hating each other, and we're never going to work together again. I'd rather walk out now and let somebody else who's hot on this idea slide in my place, and then I'll grab you on the next one. That is how you
Exactly.
build a relationship as opposed to just getting a job.
I had a director who was a very, very nice guy. Like the guy, he wanted me for an idea based on a short that he had done, and I loved the short. But when I tried to build it out into a full length movie, I was struggling. And if I'm struggling, it's not it's not the right project for me. And I told him that, And but he was so like hot on me doing that. He would email me and call me, and he would have me like go out and meet him for coffee, and he would say, "Just unpass on this because this is gonna be great." And God bless him, it was very flattering. But at the end of the day, I had to be honest with myself and say, like, is this the kind of thing? Because once your script is out there, like there are tracking boards, there are people who pay attention to like the quality level of what you're writing, like it changes how people see you and it changes what they bring you in for and like, oh, did he whiff on this one or did he crush
Mm,
this one, like that kind of, and that becomes part of your marketability for later things. So it's not doing anybody any favors to take a role that you're not right
right.
for, or you know,
Oh, fine. I'll save you your messianic complex. I think we have
it's
time
tough.
for two more. And guys, you've been incredible with your questions. I think from here on out, I'll see if I can't make some more time. I know that TJ's been gracious with his time and as of you. So I'm going to have two more just very quickly. Kevin Clausen, what would you say is your percentage of scripts that you end up scrapping, be it from either writer's block or rejection in general? Do you have that number, do you think?
I probably can ballpark it because I've been lucky.
Hmm.
I've been working consistently since 2013, so I think two or three projects I've sort of like gestated, like come up with and not sold. The other 14 I have, which is like I feel like I'm blessed for that. I'm not even a spiritual person, but that's crazy. So I think it's probably like three, yeah, probably like three or so that I've done that just have gone nowhere. I mean, there's been like little things where like I'll come up with like one line and I'll think on it for a night and be like, oh, there's nothing here. But if there's an idea that excites me enough to sit down and start writing an outline for, then I think there's something to it. And I've been successful in selling them. But again, this town is it's about more than just selling them. I think for like every 50 scripts that are purchased, maybe they end up making one,
Right.
uh, and then time of COVID, it goes down even further. So it's you just have to keep generating and keep like pouring your passion into the ideas that you're most excited about.
Love that. Our final question for you comes from Pedram. As a writer for games, do you limit your imagination to what the studio is capable of creating and you're considering how the story plays out in game levels? Or is it like usually they let you come up with the wildest imaginable things first and then you kind of cater it to that?
It's
Do you
both.
write to the studio?
It's both. You start by writing to the studio. Like there's, if they tell you they're making a space game, obviously don't bring them stuff, set underwater, right? There's certain things,
Right.
that you have to sort of consider. But I feel like, I have gone to either Insomniac or there's other people I've written for where I've been like, okay, I know that you're doing a game about XYZ, but this is a mechanic I had an idea about. This is a moment that I had an idea about. Can we do this? And they'll tell you based on their resources and what the team thinks of that idea, whether or not it's doable. So I guess I would say that the long and the short of it is like you start with what they can do, but if you've got something that you think elevates that and feels like it's part of the same game, most studios, in my experience, will hear it out. They just may say, "Oh, what you want to do means animation time that we don't have, or building a character that we don't have time for, or that kind of thing."
I always believe in trying to push something forward rather than have someone pull you forward. I've
Yeah.
always rather have someone do is like, dude, that's a great idea. We just can't do that. Versus, is that all you got? I
Yeah.
always want it to be as what's the farthest that we can go, and then we can rein it back.
Absolutely. And by the
Um,
way, you miss. This is a cliche, but it's so true. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Right.
mhm.
The most someone's ever going to say to you is no. And like when you get to to where I'm not even like that high on the line. I'm sort of middle tier writer. But like I get passes all day, and I'm just like, okay, like
Yeah.
you hear no so much that it doesn't sting anymore. So you might as well pitch them this awesome thing that you think might make a difference. And if they say no, you go, all right, and you just sort of move to the next one.
The people that get hurt over an idea being rejected are the only ones that get hurt over that are the ones that believe that's the last good idea that they're going to have.
Yes,
The people that
and
are like, I've got so many ideas right now. You don't like that? Great. I got 999 other ones behind me.
those are the writers who are going to keep getting brought back because like an expression that a lot of writers use that producers hate and execs hate, and writers for some reason think that they should say this and that it's smart. And please never say this. And that's that when they give you a note and you say, or like the writer says, well, right now like the story is a house of cards. And if I pull out this card, then it's all gonna fall. So we need to preserve it. Like, no, you need to kick over the house of cards.
Don't build a
It
house out of cards, you idiot. Build it out of bricks. I live in a house. I would never buy a house that's made of cards. Well, I know it
Right,
has that
right.
lovely oak tree in the front yard, but also this house is made of small plastic cards, actually, and it's not going to hold up against the weather, and you can blow it over with a breath.
I mean, look, that's the, it's all gonna get rearranged in some form, though, right? So
They're going
like,
to shuffle that
you're
deck,
never
bitch.
you are never gonna submit your manuscript or your script, and people are gonna be like, okay, we're gonna make a movie or a game out of this. It's just never gonna happen.
Right.
So if you put up these like blockers and just say, hey, this is creatively the best and only way that this story works, all you're gonna be telling them is that you're an asshole.
Right.
Pardon me. Like it's like you have to be able to like to be a little bit mercurial and be like, okay, like this is what you guys are after, that we can bend this way or that way. Or if they say, hey, this idea that you have, even if you're imagining it in a cool way and they just can't see it, you have to like say, okay, like what's another way to get the same feeling then? It's, it happens on, Knight Rider all the time because it's a big budget movie and everything. Every time I write the word explosion, it's nothing for me to write it, but to them, that's millions of dollars and
Right.
that's months of time. So we got to pick and choose, the battles a lot. So I think being a little bit sort of pliable and not just trying to say like, oh, I'm just this creative wonderkind who like needs everything to be done just so. That's going to give you longevity in the career. If you are one of those people who just says, hey, it has to be done this way, and all these hills are creative hills I want to die on, you're probably not going to get very far.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Guys, if for some reason we didn't get your questions, you can TJ Fixman on Twitter. If he has the time, he's a working man to be able to answer some of those. That would be great. But until then, thank you guys for joining us, continuing to support this. Thank you, TJ, for taking the time, man. I love, after the years of knowing you, still getting to know a lot more about you, man. I've got a tremendous amount of respect for you.
I'm sorry I was surly towards you. Yeah, I was just quitting smoking at the time. I was probably
So
pretty
funny.
awful.
You were cranky. You were like, I miss
Oh,
smoking.
oh, I did. Still do. But, thanks. This was fun.
Dude, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having us, guys. Again, if you know someone who wasn't here today, let them know that the link will be posted. And make sure you're back here again Wednesday. Thank you for sharing your story with us, TJ. Thank you guys for continuing to write yours. And until then, stay rad. Thank you to everybody.